Ichimon Japan is made possible in part by Patreon support. If you would like to support the show in order to make sure that we can keep bringing you more content like this, then head on over to japankyo.com/Patreon and sign up for as little as $1 a month. And for those of you who are unaware, signing up for the Patreon comes with a whole bunch of benefits, including episodes that don't have this long Patreon thing at the beginning. Early access to all the podcast episodes, bonus content such as the bonus content that I'm going to be including at the end of this episode in the Patreon version of this episode. And if you sign up for the $3 a month plus alpha tier, you're going to get access to a whole other podcast that I'm doing. It's called Japanese Plus Alpha, and it's about the Japanese language. All right, so if you can afford to do so, I would greatly appreciate it. Just head on over to japankyo.com/Patreon and sign up today. So in the Edo period, the shogun says commoners don't get to use last names, right? And so everybody's just like Bob and Bill and Thomas.
Well, could they at least say Bob 1, Bob 2, Bob 3, or are they all just Bob?
Welcome to Ichimon Japan. I'm Tony and
I'm Ryan.
And today we are once again joined by someone you may remember from episode 23 when we talked about school rules in Japan, Miyuki.
Hi, it's me again.
Hey, so Miyuki
Hello
is a
again.
good friend of ours, coming from Tokyo.
Yes.
Or outer space.
Or outer space.
Outer space, yeah.
It's a reference to something we were talking about before we started.
Yeah. Sorry, guys.
Anyway, yeah. On the recording software, we have funny little maps, and her map just looked like it was coming from outer space. So there you go. Anyway, so Ichimon means one question, which every episode we ask one question about Japan. And today's question is, how do Japanese names work? So, very complicatedly.
Not that complicated. You pick a name, you give it to the kid, and then you're done.
Yeah, pretty much. So all right. So let's just start with the very basic answer to that question, and then we'll go deeper and deeper. In Japan, the custom is to say last name, family name first, and then first name second. So, for example, Tanaka Taro would be Tanaka is the family name, and Taro is the first name. Right? That is how you work. You generally refer to people by their last name. Of course, with your friends, you may use a nickname or the first name once you get to know somebody a little bit better. But generally speaking, you would say last name, San, right? That is the most general rule, I guess you would say, for how these names work. But there's a whole lot more to the intricacies of Japanese names, and it's like ridiculously complicated once you start digging beyond that. So let's just do really briefly a little bit of history, and there are good articles on this in English and of course in Japanese too, and I highly recommend. For example, there was one on Tofugu that does a very, very in-depth like total history all the way going back to like the Yayoi period, which is like 300-ish BC, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So it's just like ridiculously complicated. We're not going to go into all the intricacies, but basically, in a nutshell, until like the Meiji period, which starts around 1868, but then there's a whole bunch of laws, and we'll get to that in a moment. But until then, it's like Japanese names were just like, let's put on a whole bunch of ranks. And my name is like, oh, I'm from a fancy clan, and I'm associated with the emperor, and I want to show off. And so I get all these like fancy schmancy names, and then your name ends up being like 6, 7, 8 like things long, right? So yeah, it was ridiculously complicated. And then there's like efforts, like the emperor says, this is too complicated, so I'm going to get rid of these, but I'm going to add these names. And then so, you have the like office name if you're a certain office in the imperial court and blah, blah, blah. And it comes and goes. And then if you're a commoner, it's slightly different. So it's just like ridiculously complicated. But let's go to the Edo period. So in the Edo period, the shogun says commoners don't get to use last names, right? And so everybody's just like Bob and Bill and Thomas.
Well, could they at least say Bob 1, Bob 2, Bob 3, or are they all just Bob?
Well, kind of. So, a lot of times, like what would happen to distinguish from each other is like, they would refer to like clan names and things like that, not technically last names, family names. But for example, samurai did start to use what would eventually become the family names. Around the Kamakura period, things start to get so complicated that they like say like everybody is like Fujiwara, Taro, no, blah, 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 whatever, so they start like adding more and then samurai start implementing like what would eventually become the family name. And then there's another interesting aspect to this where there's like this formal first name and then there's like the formal nickname and then there's like the actual true first name, but pretty much nobody uses the true first name except like the parents or maybe like the lord. So there are multiple ways to distinguish each other, even if you have the same like first name, or in the case of samurai, like similar rank and clan name and all this stuff. But going back to what we were saying, the last name is not for commoners. And then we get to the Meiji period. So Meiji is when we start to get like the more modern kind of like contemporary naming system, because they start to adapt to the Western way of doing things. But it takes a while, right? Because people are like, for example, commoners, they are worried about like, oh, if I get a first name, then you're going to start taxing me. Or
you mean the family name?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So if I start to use a family name, then the government's going to start taxing me. So then some people don't want to do it. And
to be fair, that did happen, so they were right.
Well, exactly, yeah. So once you have like a more easy to keep track of like system, that is part of it, right? It's easier to keep track of who's paying this and who's paying that.
Right.
And then there's also like, for example, I was reading one thing about priests. Priests didn't want last names either, I guess, because they're kind of rejecting the world, and, a priest doesn't need that. That's almost like a material possession identity, so you want to get rid of that. But there were various laws and especially in the 1870s, and by 1898, more or less, like you get the modern naming system of everybody just sticking to the general last name, and then you get the first name. So around this time, there's a whole bunch of really interesting little stories here and there about, how people got their last names and all this stuff. And maybe we can start with Miyuki. You were talking to somebody that about their last name, and they told you like an interesting story about how they ended up with the last name they have now, right?
Okay, yeah. So I asked a couple of my friends about interesting story about their names, especially their family names. And then there's just one friend. His name is today it's Kamiyama.
Last name, yeah.
Right? Yeah, last name is Kamiyama. And the kanji is ue, like, up or above, ue, and yama is a mountain. So his family name is Ueyama, and it's read Kamiyama.
Okay.
But it was originally Wayama.
Okay.
So the thing is, the family was in the northern part of Honshu, the main island of Japan. So they had like certain like northern dialect. So it was Ueyama, but it was pronounced Wayama. So that was how it was. Then they moved to Hokkaido is the most northern part of Japan. And when the family moved to there, other families with a name with ue and yama, those two kanjis, were read kamiyama in that area. So they just decided, oh, okay, so it's kind of complicated and confusing if we just, keep using our family name Ueyama when other families with the same kanjis are read Kamiyama. So we just got to change how it's read to Kamiyama.
Yeah. Around that time, it seems like there were a lot of, like, the rules with names were really loose and people could just kind of do whatever they want before they registered their name.
I guess.
Someone didn't want to be Bob 3 anymore, so he became Fred 5.
Like that.
Yeah, people just like, all right, I'm done with this name. And yeah, like what I was reading, it seems like it was really easy to change their names until, I guess once you get into the 1900s, it becomes a bit more challenging. And nowadays, I think Japan is, especially just both names, first name and last name, I think it's fairly tricky to change your name, especially compared to, like, for example, the United States, where it's not super difficult.
Yeah, I remember mentioning that someone in America had changed their name, and a Japanese friend was surprised that you could do that at all.
Yeah. Like I've read news stories. It's a very annoying process, and ultimately it's up to like a judge, and oftentimes the judge just doesn't accept it. So
right.
Yeah, and there's many cases which I mean it goes into a proper, more like in the first name kind of problems, where sometimes a parent might give their child a kind of annoying name that the child doesn't like, and then they want to change the name, and it's a whole thing, but we can talk about that another time. So there's many interesting stories that date back to this time of how people got their last names. So for example, a lot of people have names that are related to like place names, like something with the mountain or with the rice
above
field.
the mountain.
Top of the mountain. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like what we were talking about, Kamiyama or Ueyama or Wayama, whatever, they're all the same thing.
His name, yeah.
Yeah.
There's also in the mountain and below the mountain, so
there's
the mountain
Yamanaka in the
true.
mountain. Yeah. What else? Tanaka, which is of course a famous one, in the rice field. There's Nishida, right, to the west of the rice field. There's tons of these like rice field and mountains, and kawa, like Okawa, or just river related ones.
I feel like some government dude was just like walking through a village and just like, that guy's standing in a rice field. That'll be his name now.
It is kind of like that. So what happened, what you hear these stories, if you start, especially in Japanese, you see a lot of like people talking about this, and there's a lot of references. Like there's a whole lot more research on Japanese names in Japanese, obviously, than there is in English. But like there would be swaths. Like people said, okay, this town is near the mountain, so this part of the town is closer to the mountain, so they are Yamashita. This part is closer to the rice field, so they are Tanaka. And they would just like give all these people like these last names related to the geography, even though they are not related necessarily by blood. Another interesting thing that would happen is that people would just take on the name of a like well-known or respected like warrior or individual in the area. And that happens with, for example, Satō. So Satō is very, very common last name. And that is actually related to the Fujiwara clan. So the Fujiwara clan is one of the most well-known, respected, especially at the time, it was like very, these were like people in power. And the Satō came from a group that had an association with the Fujiwara. So a lot of these names have these kind of like samurai-ish roots or warrior roots, but the people that have these last names are not necessarily blood related to these samurai or like super respected figures, because people just want, like, I don't know, it'd be something like, my name is Tony and I want to be called Washington because I love George Washington. So I'm Tony Washington from today on, right? It'd be something like just making
nice
it
to
up.
meet you, Tony Washington.
Tony Washington, exactly. Yep.
Hello. Hello, Tony Washington.
Yeah, Tony
nice
Washington.
To meet you.
That's me. That's every single episode now. I'm Tony Washington, and then. But that is basically how it was, and then you would go register yourself, and now you are, like I don't know, like I said, Satō, whatever. And interesting, like Satō became just so common because of that, and some of those last names became like super common because of that.
I wonder if there's a big enough fan of Satō to be like Satō.
Like first name is Satō as well.
Yes.
Maybe back then.
And other names ends with to, ito, kato.
Oh yeah. Those are very common too. Yeah.
We have to explain that Fuji also read to.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So Sato, Ito, Kato, Muto.
Yeah. Those are.
They all has that to.
Right.
Is Fuji. It's the same. It shares the same kanji.
Right.
So
So yeah, a lot of these common last names, they have this sort of majestic sort of like wealth or, auspiciousness or kind of like warrior sort of vibe to them. But probably 99% of the people that have these last names descend from someone that just said, I like this last name, I'm going to use it. Not necessarily, samurai. Another interesting thing that happened when people were picking their last names is they ended up with some, by today's standards, rather peculiar last names. For example, one that is kind of, I guess, well known. I had heard about this before I had been doing the research, but Furo. So Furo is like a bath, right? The Japanese style bath, like that kind of, nowadays it's like that deep bathtub kind of thing, So how did this family end up with the last name Bath, right? Be like Johnny Bath or something like that.
Bath Washington.
Bath Washington. that's two last names.
Tony Bath Washington.
Tony Bath Washington, yes.
Cool.
So this story is apocryphal, so it seems like it did not happen, but it's the kind of story that is just so fun and interesting that people love to tell it, and it still lives on, even though it seemed all signs point to it not being true. But it was Minamoto Yoshitsune was on the run. He's a famous warrior that back in the 1100s. He was
famous for bathing.
Famous for, kind of. So he really liked bathing. He needed to get clean. And he was on the run from Minamoto Yoritomo, who's another very, very famous warrior, samurai-ish guy. And he ends up in Iwate Prefecture in some town. And I guess he's dirty. He's feeling like he needs to clean up. And he finds a furoya, which I guess, Miyuki, would you say that's like a bathhouse or what?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, furoya, yes.
Okay. So they, almost like an onsen kind of like, it's just, or like a sento, I guess would be closer, right?
Yeah.
So like a public bath. And he uses the bath. And then after he's done, he says to, I guess, the owner of this furoya, this bathhouse, you are now Furo. So he gives him the last name Furo. I guess because he was so grateful to get clean and have access to a bath. And then, he goes on his way. Now, historically, the dates and the location of this just doesn't match up. So it seems like this probably almost certainly did not happen. But
I want to imagine that like the bathhouse guy didn't even recognize him and just thought this is just a random customer giving him a name. He's like, okay, I guess so.
Okay, I guess I'm Mr. Bath now.
And since the dates don't match up, I want to believe the story is true, but it really was just some random passerby. And he just made up the thing of it being Yoshitsune later on.
True.
Yeah, I think the
That was Yoshitsune. No, it wasn't. Yes, it was.
I think what was said was like it was really like Yoshitsune never went to that part of Iwate. I think that was the main reason for dismissing this. But it could have just been some guy saying he was Yoshitsune. I mean, that's certainly possible.
Yeah, it's possible.
Yeah, you can get names so easily. Maybe some dude was like, you know what? From today, I'm Yoshitsune, and you're Mr. Bath.
Yeah,
because it's possible. It's possible that the people didn't really know how he looked like.
Definitely.
Yeah, I don't think they had like Google yet, so
I'm not sure. Maybe they didn't.
Yeah,
I think it came 2 years later.
Yeah, that's when they started using Guguru, right? That's when they started using
right. Yeah, that's the reason.
Yeah. So now, but this story of like a samurai like noble giving a commoner a last name is something that actually happened, right? Like even if this did not happen, if there was a reason, like something as a reward, oftentimes, like it's like, oh, you did a good job, so now you get to call yourself this, right? Now you get the honor of having a last name.
That's a common story that like there are various cases.
And now you must pay taxes.
Uh-oh. So, wish I didn't do that. I wish I didn't let him take a bath.
Yeah.
Your name shall be Bath Taxpayer.
Bath Taxpayer.
Oh my god.
It's like Zeikin-ro or something like that. Zeikin is tax. So, and ro is like a common suffix to first names. And one little side note to the story, Ryan, and we going back to seppuku. Yoshitsune ended up coming in seppuku. So to learn more about seppuku, go to episodes about seppuku. There's 2 of them.
Go to the podcast you're at.
Yeah, go to previous episode of this podcast, probably like 10 or 12 episodes ago. Anyway, so last names are really interesting, and there's tons of really interesting ones. For example, like Okinawa has a really interesting history with that of just picking like things in the house, right? So I can't remember exactly, but like pots or things like that, like just very common everyday things would become last names. And I'm not totally sure, but this probably dates back to around that time when people were just like kind of scrambling to like get last names. So it's like, oh, I guess I need something. So yeah, there you go. I'll be this or that. So could we just briefly discuss maybe like the top 5 last names in Japan? There's that
sounds like a good topic.
Yeah.
Do you want me to read them off?
Who wants? Okay, Ryan. Yeah, go ahead. Read the top 5.
So number 1 is Satō, as we were discussing earlier.
Yeah. About how many are in Japan?
About 1,871,000.
Okay.
Moving on.
Moving on, exactly.
Number 2 is Suzuki.
Okay.
With 1,797,000.
Okay.
I had heard that was number 1, so I don't know if something changed or if I had just heard wrong.
They fluctuate a little bit. Like maybe like 5 years ago, I think Tanaka was much higher in the list. And if you look at the numbers, they are pretty close. They're all around a little over 1 million. So
yeah. I mean, top. I think top 4.
Mm-hmm.
I see like one goes on the top, and some other year another one goes on the top, and it's kind of like changing.
We can tell who's having the most kids.
Yeah. And these statistics date back to 2019, right?
Okay, so it's a little out of date.
Yeah, no, 2019. Well, I mean, 2020, 2019. I mean, these are the most up to date because we don't have the 2020 ones yet.
Hey, a lot of kids could have been born.
Definitely. And one more thing. Just because there's a lot of Satos across the country, that doesn't mean they're all related, right? Because again,
I think they're mostly not.
Yeah, they're mostly not related because there were people all over the country that would be called Satō because they picked that last name. So that's just.
Since we're mentioning that, I will point out, since I don't know if people in America are aware of it, but Japan has kind of a lack of diversity of family names compared to other countries. Like, for example, when I was in high school in America as a student, I think usually there was not 2 people with the same last name. Occasionally there was, but most of the time there's not.
Yeah, I guess there's more of a variety because even if you're talking about like the Anglo kind of side of things, the Europe side of things, you're talking about people from like 5, 6, 7 countries, right? So
yeah. But like here in my classes, there is definitely students sharing a last name in every class, usually multiples. Yeah.
And interestingly, so compared to like, for example, Korea though, or some Asian countries, Japan has a lot more because like Korea has like 4 that are pretty much like, I don't know, the vast majority of people, right? So, and that goes back to like, China and there's a relation there, but Japan has a kind of more independent history when it comes to these last names.
I just checked on the internet and it says there are 300,000 family names in Japan.
Wow. Yeah. So that's a lot more than 4.
Yes. Take it from us. In Korea, there are 4.
Yeah. Well, there are more, but it's just the top are so overwhelmingly, like more than everything else that it's rare to come across like people that are not in that top, whatever amount of last names. So, what was the last
number
one?
3?
Number 3, okay.
Is Takahashi.
Takahashi, yeah. Okay, that's pretty common.
Which has 1,411,000.
Okay.
Number 4 is Tanaka with 1,335,000.
Yeah. Tanaka.
Which, of course, is the name of Tanaka.
Yeah, Tanaka. I think you see him in textbooks a lot, Mr. Tanaka.
We also have a mutual friend who simply goes by Tanaka.
Exactly, yes. And number 5.
Number 5 is Ito, which is 1,774,000. Sorry.
Yeah. So there you go. That's another one of those that we were talking about with the to, the kind of sound fancy last names.
Yeah, of the toes, 3 of them are in the top 10 because there's also Kato at number 10.
Kato is number 10. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, the most common ones, like I said, like around 1 million, a little bit more. What's the population of Japan like now? Like 130-ish million, something like that?
30-ish?
Yeah, around that. Or a little less than that, I think.
Yeah, so that is, a little less than, maybe like around 1% for some of those top ones, right? That is pretty...
Apparently it is 126.5 million.
Yeah, so that is around 1% for each of those top 5 at least, which is pretty impressive.
I guess it's more diverse than I thought. I don't know why we have so many kids with the same last names then.
It says there are a lot of family names that only less than 100 people have. Does it make sense?
Yes.
A lot of
yes.
So
rare
there are
names.
a lot of unique rare names around
Yes.
there.
Yeah.
So these 10
so-
might be 30, 40%, and then there's a bunch of really small
Could
ones.
be.
Yeah.
It says there are 10,000 rare names.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. So maybe that's the reason.
Yeah, for example, Furo, like we were talking about Bath, that one is one of those rare ones.
It's just that one guy.
It's just that one guy. He's still around.
He's still alive today.
Yeah, 900,
wow.
1,000 years later. But like, what's something really fun about Japanese last names? I guess you can do this with like Western names, but I do this sometimes with Japanese last names when I come across a really rare one. You can look online to see where it originated from, generally speaking, and it gives you like statistics. So, for example, like 100 in Hyogo Prefecture, 70 in like Kyoto, and just really interesting statistics. And Furo, I think the top amount was like around 100, and there were like far fewer in other places. So yeah, that is probably like less than 200 people in total for the Furo last name. And there's, like Miyuki was saying, a lot of those.
To be another thing I will point out is, as a foreigner learning Japanese, I'm grateful for the many common last names because it means there's not that many you have to learn.
Yeah.
It's true, yeah.
Yeah, you rarely come across those really super rare ones. And usually those super rare ones are so rare that even the person that has it has to explain it to other people.
Yeah.
Like Japanese people.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of these, especially like the rare ones, are very, very regional. So, I mean, like I was saying with Furo, you might only see this name pop up in certain regions. So by you, Ryan, being in Ishikawa, you may see a couple that seem common in your area, but they are totally not common in, for example, Miyagi Prefecture or Niigata Prefecture or something like that, and vice versa.
I have already kind of noticed a little bit of that kind of change from when I lived in Osaka to when I lived here.
Yeah.
Because I think where I lived in Osaka, we had a lot of Ueno and Shiota, and that's... I mean, it still exists here, but not nearly as common.
Right. Yeah. All right. So, generally speaking, that's last names. If we think of anything else, we'll put it in part 2. But let's take a break for now, and we'll come back and start focusing a bit more on first names. Hey guys, so I do have the usual announcement that you've come to expect at this point, but I also have I think it might be a reminder, or I may be saying this for the first time. I'm not totally sure, but either way, it definitely warrants a mention. And that is that every episode has show notes, right? Which you can access via your podcast app, or if for whatever reason you have trouble or you want to see the full version of the show notes, then go check out japankyo.com/Ichimon Japan. That's where all the Ichimon Japan episodes are, and you can just find whatever episode you're looking for. But anyway, in the show notes, there's a vocabulary list that will include the Japanese words that have come up in each episode. And sometimes I even throw in words that didn't actually come up in the episode but are related. Often I include words that maybe are not that well known. And so even advanced learners may learn a thing or two through some of the words that we include in the episode. So if you want to check out, how it's actually written, maybe you hear it, but you're not sure how it's written, you want to see the kanji, then go check out the vocabulary list. Every episode has at least one or two, and sometimes there's like 10 or 12. So go take a look. If you're a Japanese learner, I think that might be useful to you. So as for the announcements, remember Japan Station, October 15th, right? It always comes out on the 1st and the 15th. The latest episode is out now, and it's about Yurei, which is Japanese ghosts. And Zach Davison is the guest. He's an award-winning translator and writer, really interesting guy. He's an expert on Japanese folklore. And among the things that we talk about is a funny story about the time that he lived in Osaka in an apartment that he thinks might have been haunted. So it's a really good story. So go check that out at japanstationpodcast.com or wherever you get your podcast. And lastly, in case you missed last episode and you didn't hear about this, then go check out kimitodesigns.com. That is my new online shop where I'm going to be selling t-shirts and other stuff inspired by Japan. They're going to have designs that will either I come up with or people that I work with come up with, and they're all going to be related in some way to Japan. For example, I have a couple designs up now. One is a really cute drawing of a tsuchinoko, right? That Japanese cryptid that we talked about in the previous episode. And the other one is a cat face drawn with hiragana. It's a really cute cat face. So if you want to support the show in its own kind of indirect way and get a t-shirt or maybe a face mask in the process, then go to kimitodesigns.com. Opening 10 is a coupon code that I created to celebrate the opening of the shop. It's going to be valid until the end of the year. So go check it out. And if you can, then go pick up 1 or 2 or 3 things. All right. So let's get back to the episode. There's a whole lot more to talk about. This is a really, really meaty episode. And there's tons more information about first names. So let's get back into it. So there's a lot of interesting things that we can say about first names, how you pick them, and that's a whole intricate thing. But one brief thing that I will mention here at the beginning is so as I said in the first part, there was a whole kind of confusing system that has its roots back in China, actually. But you would have like a formal nickname and a proper true first name. And the first name, the official first name, is not one that you would normally use. People would normally just use that official nickname. And with males, one naming system that you would see in this is like based on birth order. So Ichiro, Jiro, Saburo, Shiro, and then Ichi is 1. Ji is a different pronunciation of 2. Saburo is based on 3. San and Shi is 4. And it would keep going and going and going and going and going and going. And back in those days, people had a lot of kids.
I was just saying, I wish we knew like what was the farthest number some family ever reached.
In I saw one mention of
Wow.
That's a lot. That's 35. But so I came across a thesis that looked at, it was called like the Japanese naming system, morphological and semantic something. But I can't remember what it was. It was a 150 pages of analysis of like Edo period names and modern names. And if you're into that sort of thing, I highly recommend it. It was a lot of interesting information in there. But one thing that I noticed was that I think it was a woman that wrote it, but she says that in one of the in the Edo period records, she saw one mention of 12th. So I'm assuming it's Jujiro, maybe. So So at the very least, there seems like there were families with at least 12 kids. 12 boys.
That's what I was guessing.
Wow.
Yeah.
10 to 12 was like, I think it was possible.
Yeah. And something interesting with the system is that you would, the counting would include the girl, but she wouldn't necessarily get a number-based name, right? So, for example, if Ichiro is the first one, Jiro is the second one, and then the third one is a girl, she has some girly girl name, and then number 4 is Shiro, right? So he doesn't get number 3, he gets number 4 because he's the 4th child.
And the girl gets girly girl name.
Yeah, girly girl name. Just random Edo period girly girl name.
And, like Iwa.
Iwa, yeah.
Iwa means rock. Girly girl name, rock.
Yeah, strong
very girly girl name. Rock.
Yeah.
And another interesting thing that I discovered from interviewing someone here in Hawaii. So let's see, it was... Yeah, well, okay, so there are many Japanese American families here, and around the second generation, they were still using the same sorts of naming conventions for their actual first name. So you would see Ichiro, Jiro, and you would have these very big families. And I was doing the research for one of these families, and I noticed, like, there's a missing number there. Like, there was, like I said, like maybe like Saburo was missing or something like that, number 3. And so after a little bit more of digging, I realized, I think it was a daughter that she died very early on in like as a baby. So they kept that same name, like number convention. And it's an interesting sort of, because in my head, like the numbers didn't count. It was like 5 brothers, but there's only 4 numbers. Why is this? And so I had to like dig into some other interviews, and it was because there was a sister that had passed away or something like that. So it's interesting. You can do a little bit of detective work through that sort of thing. But when the formalized naming conventions came about in the Meiji period, 1870s to like the 1898, when it was kind of all like really turned into what it is now, a lot of families just kept using that naming system as the proper first name, right? So those were originally kind of formal nicknames, but they became like the proper first name. So interesting little quirk. But going into today, now today people still, of course, right, use first names, right, Miyuki?
Yes.
Yes.
Pretty much, yes.
Yes. So
I believe so.
Yeah. So just like
at least 10% of people have first names.
Yes. Even though people normally just use the last name a lot of times, they might say Tanaka-san, especially if you're not that close to a person. But
yeah, actually, I don't know the first names of most of my coworkers.
I was just about to say that. Because of that, a lot of times, like, you end up forgetting people's first names.
What's also funny is, like, you often refer to someone by, like, their job position. So, for example, the principal, we just call Kocho Sensei.
Yeah.
So sometimes people are like, what's the Kocho Sensei's name again?
That's interesting, but I guess so.
That's happened to me when I used to work at Japanese schools. I go like, wait, what was her last name? What was her first name?
Yeah, we got a new vice principal, which is Kyoto Sensei. And, like, 2 months in, I was like writing something. I was like, what's their name? And I asked the teacher, like, I don't know. Let me check.
Yeah, it's funny. I guess in the West, we get maybe the opposite sometimes. You don't really remember the person's last name, but you know them by their first name so much. I think that might happen.
But we know you're Tony Bath Washington.
Tony Bath Washington.
Yeah, we now know. Yeah.
Yep. I have filed my paperwork at the local Honolulu courthouse. So, yep. All right. So then how do you go about like picking a name? That is a whole like complicated process. But Miyuki, do you want to like give some general ideas? I don't know if you asked around or if you heard anything from people, how they pick like names for a baby.
Yeah.
Did you know how your name came about?
Is there a special story to your name, for example?
My name.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's kind of embarrassing to like introduce, but Miyuki. So of course there are kanjis for my first name, and Mi is beauty,
Yeah, often me is used with, often you write me with beauty. Yeah. Not always, but like I would say 80-90% of the time I see that.
Something like that. And Yuki
I just sort of assume it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Yuki is like happy or happiness.
Oh, okay.
So I have a name of beauty and happiness, or like be beautiful and happy, something like that.
Yeah.
I think it's beautiful. I like it.
It's a nice name. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
So here's a little tip for especially like Japanese language learners. Something very easy to do to strike up conversation is to ask people about the kanji of their name.
Oh, that's true. That's a good
Everybody
idea.
has something to say about that. And that is something that I would often do when I want to like try to get a conversation going with someone. And then, you can just go from there. And it's very easy to, it's like in college asking like, what's your major? It's like the easiest question you can have for people, right?
Right.
Until you run into the girls that don't have kanji.
Yeah.
Especially girls. Some of them don't have kanji.
Yeah. And that's an interesting story in and of itself sometimes. So
I've had a few boys that had katakana first names too.
Oh, wow.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Yeah.
I don't want to say the names of my students, but after the recording's done, I'll tell you.
Okay.
Yeah. But that is one thing that people think about when they're placing a name. They kind of think about what kind of adult they want their child to become, right? What kind of life they want them to have, right? So they pick a kanji with a nice name, with a nice meaning, right? So like in your case, they want you to be, to have a happy life, to be beautiful, to be, oftentimes you'll see things like healthy. Girls, oftentimes, you do see beautiful and that kind of thing. With boys, you'll see something more like strong or something like that, right?
Right.
I think Taro, like fat, right? You see the kanji for fat, but
actually.
But that just
be
means
a fat boy, son.
But that just means like a healthy, like big, strong boy, right? But you can interpret it as a fat boy.
One story I think I can tell that's from a friend who's not a student is I had a friend named Koji, and his brother was Kenji, and the Ken and Ko together were Kenko for health.
Oh, interesting.
Oh, interesting.
And they both end in G too, right? So that kind of that is something that I've noticed too. A lot of times siblings will have some kind of similar name, like you were saying, they have a similar sound, or maybe the kanji are related in some way. Especially, I would imagine like a lot of twins probably have like extra interesting similar names. But that is pretty common. Like often what I would do is like, one of those questions that you ask people when you're trying to make conversation is, do you have any siblings, right? And then one of the next questions I would often have is, what's your sibling's name? Because I was always curious about whether they had some interesting name related to their siblings. So.
Kind of a callback, but we did do the Kimi no Nawa episode, and I believe all the girls there had the same kind of callback name.
Yeah, those have interesting names, and that episode is coming out soon in some way or another. Maybe Patreon exclusive. We'll see. But
we recorded it earlier. I kind of thought we had it out.
Yeah, I know we recorded that a while ago. But anyway, They're in anime too. Like, there's so many interesting names in anime. Like, they're often pawns.
Goku, Gohan, Goten.
Yeah. They all have the go, right? And there's tons of interesting ways to like dissect these names.
Though George Foreman made it even easier. They're just George. Yes. So Miyuki, George Foreman is a famous boxer. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. And he had like he named all of his children George, the boys and the girls.
Yeah, he had like 6 or 7 or 8 kids. I don't know how many, and they were all named George.
Really?
Yeah.
And his reason was when he's been hit in the head that much, that's the only name he could remember. He's a boxer.
Yeah, so that's a funny thing that I think many Americans still remember. Anyway, so another thing that people think about when naming children is, of course, like the kanji, but the way the kanji is written, specifically like the number of strokes. So, the easiest way to explain this is when you write something like the letter T in English, that is 2 strokes, right? You go 1 horizontal, 1 vertical. That is 2 strokes. Kanji, of course, has many more strokes usually. And depending on whether it's like 18 or 19 or it's an even odd number, or the combined with the last name, or the radical, or the first and last kanji, the first of the the last name, the last of the first name, and there's all these combinations. And it's like it's in my opinion, it's basically like fortune telling, right? Like, you know, you read into like, you know, how many kanji and you count them, and then this one has a good meaning, this one has a bad meaning, and then, you know, somebody tells you like this is good, this is bad, and you can hire people to do this for you. And I was trying to find out, like, for example, a shrine. Shrines do this. You can go to your local shrine, or there are famous shrines. Like there's one in Kyoto, and there's probably several. But you can go and approach them, and they can figure it out for you and give you a name, a list of names, or you give them a list of names, and then they pick the one that they think might be best. And, you know, they take into account all these things like the stroke number and the good meaning and the meaning that you want it to have and this aspirational meaning to it and the sound, because another thing is, does it sound cute? Does it sound nice? Does it sound strong, right? Regardless of the kanji. And so how much does this cost if you approach like a shrine or, well, let's start with a shrine. So I saw 10,000 to about 30,000 yen. Typically about 10,000 yen, which is about $100 or to $300. That I mean, that seems reasonable, especially if it's around $100. That doesn't seem like such a big expense. But if you go to, I think the word is like a seimeihandanshi, right? Which is this kind of, again, to me, it's kind of like a fortune teller, right? Like they're these experts in reading like all the various like stroke counts and the meanings of the kanji and this sort of like, you know, in the future, this will happen to you because you have this kanji. One article I was reading was it starts at about 50,000 yen and up. So about $500 or more.
I'm going to change jobs. That sounds like it pays a lot better.
Yeah.
Everyone should be named George. George
pretty good money.
Wow.
Yeah, that's pretty good money.
There will be a lot of George in Japan.
But no one will notice for like 20 years, and by then I'll switch to a new name.
And one more thing about the shrine. So, for example, traditionally, you were supposed to wait like 7 days. Like on the 7th day, you would get the name after the birth of the child, right? You would get the name. It was like a ceremony. And that was because back in the day, like in the old days, oftentimes children, the baby would not live a long time, right? Maybe like die right after childbirth. So, you would wait until a week after to officially do the name and all that. And then what I was reading was you had to present the birth registration within 14 days. And I guess that is where you put the official name of the child. Yeah. So, what are some popular first names then? So, names just like in the West, you know, you have trends of names, and the names that were popular 20 years ago are not necessarily popular right now, or 30 years ago, or 40 years ago. So I tried looking around for the most recent statistics. What I found was a 2019 list that was put out by Meiji Yasuda Seimei Hoken, which is like an insurance company, a life insurance company. And every year they put out a list, which I believe is based on their clients. So it's actually not necessarily representative of the country as a whole, but it's still interesting in that you see sometimes names that we are not familiar with, that we've never heard of, unless you work with babies, they pop up and you go like, oh, I've never heard this name before. So Miyuki, would you mind reading maybe like the top 5 of the boys and the top 5 of the girls that are on that list?
All right. So from the top one, number 1 is Ren.
Ren, that's for boys, right?
Yeah, it's for boys.
Mm-hmm.
So Ren.
Yeah.
And the second is Minato.
Minato, okay. I think I've heard of Minato. Ren is
we have like 1 or 2
I've
Minatos in my school, I think.
Yeah, I think both are not that uncommon. At least I've heard older kids name that.
Yeah. And then the third place is Haruto.
Yeah, I've heard plenty of Harutos.
That one's,
Yeah.
I think in my students that's more common than the other two, but generations change.
Then, and then Ritsu follows.
Ritsu.
The number 4.
I think I've heard Ritsu, but to me at least it was more uncommon.
Yeah, Ritsu, I don't know if I've heard.
Mm-hmm.
And then number 5 is So.
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 So desu ka?
So
I like how that name has so much potential. Like, is your name Soda?
I mean, that is. I mean, I don't mean any disrespect to souls out there, but that seems like the kind of name that children would make fun of in the playground. Unfortunately, because so this guy is like, is that so or really or something along those lines, right? So. Yeah.
Apparently, it's the 5th most common name now, so there's going to be a lot of it.
I guess so, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting, yeah.
But,
I had not heard any souls.
But we also have to, look at the kanjis, actually.
Yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So means, deep blue.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So, it could be, some kind of meaning in it.
Yeah. So, I've heard Sosuke, for example, or something like that.
I was thinking I've heard so plus something. Sota.
Yeah.
Sota, Sosuke.
Yeah.
Soji.
I guess, yeah. These days you get soji. That's another interesting one. Another interesting thing that this reminds me of, in that thesis I was talking about, it briefly discusses tōriji, which are, so in the West, there is a not uncommon tradition of the father naming the son after himself, and that same name was from the grandfather, and that same name was from the great grandfather, and so you end up with Jonathan Edwards the third and the fourth and the fifth. That doesn't really happen in Japan unless you are talking about entertainment and arts. So in the world of kabuki, or maybe in traditional Japanese music or rakugo, people inherit names of a household, which is what they call an iemoto. And so you may get certain names, like Tatekawa is a common rakugo last name, then some first name, and then sandaime, yondaime, third generation, fourth generation. But those names are usually created and inherited, right? They were created at some time, or maybe the original person actually had that last name. I can't say for sure. Maybe it varies from case to case, but
maybe
you don't see that normally in everyday life. In everyday life, you see what I was talking about earlier, tōriji, where you might still see this sometimes. Various family members might use one same kanji, one same reading of a kanji in their name, but it might be Katsuhide and then Hide something, Hide Masahide. They might all use the Hide in the boys of that family for, because that's just part of their family, and that's called tōriji. And that's an old tradition, and you still see it from sometimes. So maybe you might see that with so something, who knows, right? Some of these names, you might see different variations of them. But anyway, that's just something I remembered. But let's go to the girls then, top 5.
Okay, so the number 1 first place is Himari.
Himari. I've never heard Himari. I've never heard that.
Okay, I haven't either, and I was worried it was just me because it's the number 1 one.
No. I think that is 20 years ago or 30 years ago, that was probably not around, or very, very rare.
Apparently last year it was ranked 3, though. Yeah,
exactly. It's been around for at least 2 years. And the kanji was interesting for that one too, right, Miyuki?
Yeah.
What is it?
So it is the kanji for sunflower.
Mm-hmm.
And sunflower is himawari in Japanese.
So they just don't like wa.
Well, there are chance that girls have a name himawari, but it's kind of a long, because girls' names tend to be shorter than boys' names here.
Yeah.
So very few girls have names more than 4 letters. But for boys, there are in recent time the name gets shorter and shorter. But boys used to have longer, Shoichiro, Shotaro,
right,
a longer name, and girls' names tend to be much shorter than that.
Yeah.
So I think that's why the parents decided to take off wa, and instead of himawari, they decided to name their girls himari.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Himari
Just
does sound more
assuming.
name as opposed to himawari, which just sounds like a word, though.
Yeah, although sometimes you do get word names too. Although I think it's less common than in the West, where sometimes you see like rose and hope and very
charity,
common everyday words. Bath, yeah, me, exactly. Another interesting thing that I read was that in recent years you've been seeing more girls' names with flower somehow in them. Something flower related in the name.
That's true.
That would count.
Like, for example, maybe like 30 years ago or 40 years ago, like certain female names were more popular. For example, the ones that end in ko. So, of course, Yoko or Yuko or Ryoko or Naoko. And there's so many something calls.
Miyukiko.
I think
Miyukiko.
Does that? I don't know if I've ever heard that one.
I don't think there is, but it could have been.
That's too long. Miyukiko. Yeah.
Miyukiko.
Sachiko, or there's tons of these.
Hachiko.
Hachiko. That's a different thing. But anyway, so ko's were very popular back then. And when I run into like women in their maybe like 30s, but probably mainly 40s, I meet a lot of, especially here in Hawaii, I meet a lot of yukos and yokos. A lot.
Yeah, same experience here.
Yeah. But these days, ko kind of sounds old-fashioned, so I think it's pretty rare compared to, how it used to be.
I feel like Hanako is still around a little bit, but definitely
very
way less
rare.
common.
I haven't met any Hanakos lately. Or ever, maybe. I'm not sure. Anyway, number 2.
Okay, number 2 is Mei.
Mei. Oh, okay.
Mei.
Yeah, that one's I think been around for a long time.
Yeah, I guess so.
Like in Totoro, there's Satsuki and Mei.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Satsuki and Mei.
Yeah.
It's funny, Satsuki means May in English.
Yeah. Satsuki is the old name for Mei in Japanese.
Mei. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a pun, another pun, like I said, siblings. Siblings often have these interesting little connections between their names,
I guess so.
Especially in anime. Yeah.
Yeah, we can say that.
Yeah.
And the number 3 is Rin.
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 So I think another thing that seems to be kind of popular in the past 20 years or so is names that might be able to be both kind of English sounding and like Japanese sounding. And Rin could be interpreted as Lin as well. But I do think Rin probably existed before, this awareness of the name Lin was around, but I'm not sure on that. But that is, for example, like Judia, maybe? I think I've seen like Judy or something along those lines, or Maria, like Maria.
Yeah, I've seen some Marias.
Like yeah,
Maria.
I've seen names like that. So these kind of slightly international names that can go both ways.
I guess so.
Yeah.
In recent years, it's more common to give their children some names that could be easier for Westerners to pronounce.
Yeah. Okay, number 5, I think, right? Was that the next one?
Number 4.
Number 4.
Number 4 is, I think it's a bit hard for English-speaking people to pronounce, but tsumugi.
Oh, yeah. Tsumugi with a mu?
Tsumugi, yeah. Mami mume mo tsumugi.
Interesting. I've never met a tsumugi. What is the kanji for that one?
Itohen.
Okay, so thread radical.
I was really hoping she was like, the kanji is tsumugi.
No, I'm just wondering if it has a specific meaning outside of the kanji. Outside of the name.
Okay, so what I've been guessing is there are 2 different common kanjis for the sound tsumugi. And one tsumugi is like spinning string.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Like when you're spinning yarn, like when you're sewing kind of thing, right?
Yeah. And then another tsumugi, let's see, I'm just searching right now. Another tsumugi, I think it's okay, so tsumugu, okay, maybe I was wrong. It has like a pretty similar meanings, those 2 kanjis. Okay, maybe I can say that. Tsumugi has two different kanjis for that sound. And one tsumugi is until the Edo period, that was the like everyday kimono for the commoners.
Oh. Okay, that's why it has the thread radical. It's related to fabric of some kind, maybe.
Yeah. And because this is the kanji that I imagine when I hear the word tsumugi. That's one kind of kimono.
Right.
And then there's another kanji for tsumugi, but it's actually a verb. That's tsumugu.
Okay.
Yeah, so tsumugu is the word that, just like you said earlier, like yarning
like spinning yarn or
spinning yarns and
like kind of sewing, spinning yarn, something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
So I'm curious though, like usually the imagery of these, whether it's noodles or yarn, these sorts of like long, thin things usually are related to a long life. Do you think that is the idea here in this name? Like what is because to me, this doesn't necessarily sound all that feminine or beautiful or like, what do you think is the attraction to this name?
It made it to number 4 too, so it seems fairly popular.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It just,
or does it just sound
personally,
cute?
I mean, personally, it just sounds a bit classic.
Oh, interesting.
So it's like I'm going to say something completely different from what I've said earlier, but it doesn't sound like a Western name at all.
Oh,
it's like a classic,
very traditional wa, very,
wa kind of sound.
Wa
and
means
also
like
there is a Japanese there's a Japanese word like kotoba o tsumugu.
And what does that mean?
And so kotoba o tsumugu is like when we say kotoba o tsumugu, it's like a really like poetic action. Like creating like poetic words or sentence or something like that.
Okay, so the vibe that I'm getting is kind of like a traditional Japanese, sophisticated sort of, almost a little bit like
artistic,
fancy, classic, artistic feel.
Kind of.
No. I get why that would be a name, why someone would want to name their child. That makes sense. Sure. Oh, it's very interesting.
Yeah. I don't know, I'm just guessing, but I actually have a friend who named their daughter Tsumugi like last year.
Oh. Wow. Interesting.
Yeah. So I think it's
that's where this date is from.
Yeah. That's she's one of the people in this survey, maybe.
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe. Okay, so that was very interesting. So let's go on to number 5 then.
Number 5 is Riko.
Riko. Interesting.
Riko.
Is that ko with the child ending?
Yeah.
Or is that a different? Oh, so there you go. You do still get some ko's nowadays still.
Yeah, but the thing is, I was going to say this. The thing is, even today we see some names that ends with ko. But it tends to be like this Riko or Mako or Ako. It's not like traditional Yuko, Yoko, Masako, Kazuko, Akiko kind of ko names.
So usually with those old-fashioned ones, they seem to be at least 3. In the linguistic world, they're called mora, right? Is that right, Ryan? Am I remembering this correctly? Okay. But what we're talking about is the 3 hiragana that you would use to write it. So you would write it yo, u, ko. But in these, what you're talking about is just 2, right? 2 syllables in the English understand, right? Ri, ko, ma, ko. Yeah. So they're a little bit shorter.
Riko.
So
yes.
I mean, I guess to the modern ear, I think that sounds cuter or maybe cuter. Maybe I'm not sure if that's the right word, but to me, it has a slightly cuter vibe than the slightly more old-fashioned sounding names.
I guess so. Yeah.
So in 30 more years, it'll just be ko.
Ko, just ko.
Ko. Ko.
Number 1, ko.
Ko.
Yep, it's just getting shorter and shorter, and then in
6 years,
no. In like 50 years, it's gonna be. Just because that's the shortest sound we get in Japanese. So
That's funny.
so yeah, there you go. And there is
Nchan.
Nchan.
Jan. Yeah, but as I look at these rankings, I can say that both boys' names and girls' names are much shorter
Yeah.
recently.
Yeah, I think so too.
Because Ren, Ritsu, Sou, Riku, Yu for boys,
Yeah,
and Mei, Rin, Riko, Yua, Mio, An, Rin, Hina.
Very short.
girls.
Yeah, they're all one or two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One or two.
Yeah, they're all one or two like sounds, syllables
Right.
or whatever.
Syllables.
Right. But just like I said earlier, there were names like Daijiro,
Yeah.
Shotaro,
Yeah.
like,
Yunosuke.
Ryunosuke,
Yeah.
Jotaro, and then Sakurako,
Yeah.
or like girls had like names like Yuko, Kazuko, just like I said.
Right. Yeah. So
Okay, after we go to N, it's going to loop back around, and then we're going to have Yukikoko.
Yuki Koko.
Maybe like Miyuki Koko.
Yuki Koko.
Yeah, Miyuki Koko.
Oh, I want that to
Miyuki Koko.
happen.
Yeah.
I really want that to happen.
My great granddaughter will be Miyuki Koko.
Somehow it became cuter the more Ko's you add on there, I think.
That is pretty cute. I mean, it's silly, but it's cute. Yeah. Okay, so there is much.
So leave instructions for your descendants,
Yes.
like great-great-granddaughter must be Miyuki Koko.
Yes,
Miyuki
exactly.
Koko. Yeah.
All right, there is so much more we can say about this, but I think we can come back and do a part 2 soon, or maybe next time. I don't know. We'll see, because there's tons more to this whole naming and interesting names and modern names and creative names and all that stuff. But Ryan, Miyuki, let's go. Ryan, anything else you want to add before we end it?
Nope.
Okay, Miyuki, anything else you want to add before we end this?
Yeah, so there's one thing I've been thinking. So when Japanese people register children's names, that would be only characters. If you write children's name in kanji, that's only kanji.
Right.
If your the son or daughter's names are written by hiragana or katakana, all those letters, that's the only thing that register, like officially.
Right.
So it could be read completely different from what's written in the kanji.
Right. So if
Yeah,
you
I
only
see that
write
a
the
lot.
kanji, people often, especially if it's a very creative, like if it's not one of these older names that everybody knows, if you do a really creative usage of kanji that is not common with some really interesting reading, the rest of that kid's life, they're going to be going, oh, it's read like this, it's read like this, it's read like this.
Yeah.
Unless it becomes super popular, then
Yeah.
everybody just eventually learns. But with a very creative name, it can be kind of a burden in a way where they have to explain their name every single time.
Right.
I feel like that's becoming so much more common, though, that in the future they're just going to assume you can't tell just by the kanji.
Or they
That's true.
always furigana, always with the hiragana on top.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then what I was thinking was, was that my friend's family name from Wayama to Kamiyama story,
Yeah.
maybe that is because of that, because what they register
definitely.
is only kanji,
Yeah.
and how it's pronounced doesn't really matter.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah,
So-
it could have been an accident in
Yeah.
a way. Right?
And
There
if
could have been
they,
like 10 years of like, no, that's not our name.
It's like, oh, fine. Everybody just thinks it is. So I guess that's what it is.
So if they were to change their kanjis, it could have been a bit more difficult. But if it was only how it's said and read, that was
Yeah.
way easier to change.
Yeah.
We did mention how like it's difficult to change your name in Japan compared to other countries. So maybe people, because the pronunciation's not recorded, they're just like, oh yeah, kanji's the same, but now I'm going by this name.
Could be.
Could be, yeah, especially back then. It's, like I said, back then it seems like it was a lot looser. Like they were just able to change their names a lot more easily. And there are records of name changes. And even like the whole like women changing their name upon marriage, like that wasn't a thing until 1898. People could keep they actually did keep both last names, the women and the men. But then I think it was 1898 when that stopped being allowed, and that is the way it is today. And there was a whole big court case where, you know, women are still not allowed to keep their name after marriage. So everything was a lot
ongoing thing.
Yeah, everything was a lot looser like 100 years ago, or 120, 130 years ago. Everything was very, very loose, it seems. So yeah. Well, I think we should definitely come back to do an episode about like the very creative names. So we'll do that maybe next time or another time. Yeah. So yeah, we'll leave it at that. If you have any interesting names or questions about names or any questions at all, you can send us an email to Ichimon at japankyo.com. Yes, that's the one.
We hope.
I have too many email addresses. Ichimon at japankyo.com. Yes. So you can send us an email. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Miyuki.
Thank you for having me again, guys.
See you next time.
Thank you, Tony Bath Washington.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Tony Bath Washington.
Okay, bye.
See you all next time.